All right, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us here. We're here to talk about mitigating human risk, how to build a secure culture. I am Andrew Morris from Turnkey Consulting. I'm one of the application and cybersecurity practice directors for the UK and Ireland. In my role, I oversee the delivery team, and I work with a lot of our customers to understand how security is effectively managed within their organization. Turnkey Consulting, if you're not familiar with us, we're a risk organization at our heart, trying to help organizations transform their security and risk functions into engines of change, drivers of change within the organization to enable organizations to go even faster. One of the ways we do that is by enabling security and risk teams across organizations to become business partners. So they're included in a lot of these change. And one of the ways we do that is through managing this human risk. Next slide, please, Harshini. I'm joined today by my colleague, my senior manager, Harshini Carey, who I'll introduce in a moment. But I'm also very pleased to be joined by James Frampton as a special guest who's going to be taking us through his world. And he is the regional CISO for EMA and sorry, James. He's the regional CISO for EMEA for MUFG Bank and Securities.
Hi, thanks, Andrew. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Harshini Carey. I joined Turnkey recently as a senior manager to help Andrew and his organization in terms of application security. So I'm joined by James Frampton. James, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, so I've been CISO for the last 6 years or so for MUFG. I'm really interested in risk, and so is my board, to be honest with you. And therefore, humans often get in the mix with risk because we create a lot of risk ourselves because we're only human. So this is a great session to hopefully find ways of handling, recognizing, and dealing with that human risk. Thanks.
Thanks, James. So before we start the meeting and dive in, I like to talk about a few takeaways after the webinar. So technology is not the problem or the solution. Often people think that technology is going to fix whatever the problems you have. So it's the human and the behavior that we need to understand. Then the next area that we are going to discuss is sort of identifying who access what resources, and adapting. The key is to sort of successfully creating awareness training by having an open communication and maybe creating a, how should I say, inclusive culture where people feel they can sort of speak openly and address if they see there is a risk or a threat to the company. And creating, most importantly, trust and adaptable policies. And the other area we're going to talk about is how to measure the effectiveness of your training. So with further ado, we'll start the webinar now. So curious, often humans are born curious. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, we are curious individuals. So we click on phishing links to see whether we want something, or you know, we would click on various, I don't know, how often would you get a message on your phone saying, hey, you want something, click on this free gift. James, from your experience and being in the industry for many, many years, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, we are naturally curious, and we also don't mind anything for free. So you know, it's just human nature, but we've got to be a little bit aware, much more aware in business and in life now, because the bad guys are getting cleverer and cleverer. They might be using ChatGPT or something like that to help them construct their messages now. We have to be even more curious when we see those messages come up. Say, really? Is anything really for free? No, I don't think so. Hover over the URL. It'll tell you the real URL. Is it in Gmail, really, for an organization? You know, stuff like that. It's across our personal devices, especially this time of year. Lots of deals to be had. It's across our personal devices, and if we're not careful, it reaches into our organizations as well. So yeah, we've got to be really careful on phishing.
And it's interesting, even it's not just only adults, even little children. So I have come across my teenage often sort of clicking on, I don't know, gaming rewards and getting very excited saying, hey, I got a freebie, but you're not going to get a freebie. Somebody's trying to hack in. So this is what I'm saying. So you kind of have to educate from a very young age, because they're all sort of, every kid has a device now and access to the internet. So Andrew, from your sort of experience working in various industries, how do you sort of deal with this?
I think
Sorry.
I don't think there's one answer that solves everything. For me, it comes down to understanding the industry the organization works in, or the business they provide or service. You know, I don't believe that humans are malicious by nature, certainly from a security point of view. They're just unaware or don't care. You know, if we don't understand how businesses operate, we're putting controls in the wrong place. We're not protecting how they work or where they work or the ways they work. And ultimately, breaches happen as a result. You know, they're trying to do their job, get home, and finish their work for the day. So, you know, if you make sending an email or a sensitive file an overcomplicated step for them, because that's something they do 300 times a day, they're going to try and find workarounds, which can easily result in breaches. So yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a golden bullet, but for me, it's understanding how people work and embedding that security mindset as part of a culture. You know, making it part of what people think about.
Yeah, it's kind of sort of educating them to how to identify phishing or mishing or whichever the method they get sort of targeted. And then in terms of the trust and helpfulness, I think we are wired to be compassionate, whether we like to admit it or not. Humans are wired to be helpful and compassionate. So that's another cause of sort of social engineering. I myself has to sort of help a client, insurance company. This is about good 10 years ago. So my job was to go through the insurance from the entrance to the 7th floor and pick up the Cisco phone and inform the CISO that, you know, I managed to get into their building. And I used my child. And believe it or not, everybody was so helpful and very kind. One employee even offered me his card because I said, I'm sorry, I lost my card. So I used his card to get access to the whole building. So yeah, it's nice and compassionate and helpful, but you need to be careful, right? So where do we draw the line? So James, have you, I mean, you work in the bank with many sort of regulations and things like that. So how do you sort of tackle this and how do you deal with this?
I think the important thing is, yes, we can be polite, but being helpful, are we following the process? Are we aware that there is a process here? If you've lost your card, hang on a second. Let me just double check. What's your name? Yeah. What floor do you work on? Who's your manager? You know, just a few things like that. We'll still be polite.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the how should we say, the really untrustworthy individual will probably turn around and just walk away, because that's just too hard. So it's about, as we said at the outset, it's about awareness, people being aware of what the proper process is, but still be polite.
Interesting. Andrew, do you have any sort of your kind of experience about social engineering?
It probably echoes James's thoughts. Honestly, you know, it's getting that culture of challenge. You know, being helpful is, as you said, is second nature to many people, but in many areas we have to question, we have to challenge. You know, on secure floors, secure areas, why do people have access, and restricting that down as much as we can to prevent someone good intentioned from accidentally breaching it.
So do you think culture also perhaps play a role in this, purely because the reason I'm asking is British people are very polite. They always like to hold the door for people. So things, you know, certain countries may not do that. So do you think perhaps the cultural education also quite a crucial part?
I mean, Hashini, that culture is what makes the world. What makes the world go round. And I think we all adopt and adapt when we move to a different culture, even if we're on holiday. We learn how to say hello, hopefully, and thank you. The basics. Yeah. So some cultures are more direct,
Yeah.
and some are more, I don't know, engaging. Let's call it that. But ultimately, as a human being, we've got to be true to ourselves. And in this case, in our businesses, we've got to be. There's processes to follow. It doesn't mean to say we flip out the rule book and say, see rule number 5. Can you answer that question? That's probably not the way of doing it, because it may actually be a genuine mistake. It may actually be a genuine, you genuinely probably do work there. Of
Yeah.
course, it has to be asked the why have you got your child with you, but it's stuff like that. It's a process that is adaptable to any culture that will protect you and remove some of that risk.
And the mindset, sort of having a more sort of awareness mindset, I suppose.
Yeah.
So that leads to our next topic, which is uninformed. So I think this is mostly to do with when people are not aware or educated properly. That's where the whole risk would, in my opinion, would be the cause of it. So often when I work in the past with cybersecurity, we had access control from various format access control to prevent this happening. But I think it's quite important to sort of train people in based on their perhaps the work role. So if you're working in the manufacturing industry, what works for the manufacturing plant may not work for the financial sector or the sort of finance or the HR department. So how do you sort of design these or sort of tailor make this from a awareness or training perspective, James?
Well, if you make something complicated and people find it difficult to do, they might not even know the outcome of it or the reason why it's happening, but they may fail in the journey in terms of getting to the secure place that you want them to get to. So let's make our instructions simple and straightforward. Let's get machines to automate things for us that are simple, straightforward, and very, very repeatable. And then let's make sure we know what the outcome is. In other words, if people know the reason why, they'll probably get the reason why we're doing what we do to protect the environment or the work environment or work access. So yeah, and I mean, I've got a story. So how long have we got? Nigel Mansell, right? In his book, he talks about he was driving at breakneck speed and he said, don't interrupt me. I'm very much paraphrasing this. Don't interrupt me because I'm going so fast and it's looking cool. Just interrupt me if there's oil on the track or something. So he did a number of laps, 10 laps or something, came back on the intercom, said, oh, how's it going? He said, well, you did really well. Your fastest lap was in amongst that lot. He said, oh. They said, what were you thinking after the race? They said, what were you thinking? He said, well, I was thinking about dinner. I was thinking about holiday. I was thinking about building a house in Cornwall. While he was driving around a racing track at hundreds of miles an hour. What that is he'd learned many, many things about that car and about driving. So it became the normal thing to do. And therefore he was in the zone. We need to get people informed and aware enough to be in their own zone so that they know what to do, they instinctively know what to do. That's our target. And all the help, simple, straightforward help and instructions and stuff we can give them, that will really, really help.
Okay, that's quite interesting. So it's like train your muscle brain is trained to do it's like a habitual. So security is sort of become very normal habit, and that's
I call it
quite,
state of mind, Harshini.
yeah,
Sorry, security is a state of mind. Like, do we ever think how long it takes for us to get our keys out to go through the front door? Oh, all this security, it's such admin. It takes us so long. It takes us 20 seconds. And yet you put multi-factor authentication, for example, where people effectively have to log in twice or with code. That only takes a few seconds. It's just like walking in your house, but walking in your house is just so normal. And that's how security should be. And that's how we deal with the risk of poor security by training ourselves to just do it naturally.
Yeah, interesting. So without making it sort of a cumbersome or hindrance, making it more sort of a habitual activity. Andrew, do you have any sort of any input for this?
I mean, I don't think I can add much to what James said, but I definitely agree. We make risk decisions every day of our life. Do I turn left? Do I turn right? Should I slow down while driving? And they're second nature. And to get security to that perfect state would be amazing, but it's not necessarily easy. I will just flag though, access controls, as you said, they're in place if people aren't, if the culture isn't there, if people aren't trained. You probably still need some of them anyway. We're not advocating you get rid of all your security and rely purely on humans. There will always be a need for, the multiple layers of defense and all the other elements that we built up over the years. But certainly educating our colleagues, our employees, our third parties, anyone who accesses our data or systems is going to make that life easier.
Yes, and also sort of having a clear sort of maybe understanding who has access to what and who holds the data, etc., is also quite important. So
well, that's another battle entirely. Where is our data and who has it? But yeah.
Yeah. So shall I go to the next slide?
Yeah.
So these are all the recent hacks, as you can see. This was the most recent one, which was a nuclear plant, which was believed to have been hacked in 2015. And they're saying, this is not actually, don't quote me on this, they're saying it's due to a toxic culture in the organization that this was breached. And then I'm sure James would love to talk about ICBC Bank from your industry. Would you like to talk something about the hacking of the ICBC Bank?
Yeah, I mean, there's some good and some bad with the ICBC. The first thing they did really, really well is they had a good DR plan. So very, very quickly, they were able to, clear, etc. in the US to deal with their customers that way through another bank, through Bank of New York Mellon. But what they didn't do very well, as everyone knows now, is they didn't patch the perimeter. Now, again, this is muscle memory. You've got to, certain things are really important in the industry, and ourselves, we have to put in the appropriate things that we do every day, every month, whatever, or if it's an emergency, we do it now, to protect our environment. And that reduces the risk to the business. So it was about patching the perimeter, that there was a patch that wasn't applied. So again, they'll have learned that lesson, and everyone watching that story will have also learned that lesson. Let that become muscle memory.
Andrew, have you got any sort of
No, I think the toxic one's an interesting case study, right? Because we often, for many years, humans are the weakest link. Humans are going to cause all of these security breaches and data. And while, we're trying to prevent that by, humans aren't the weakest link. It's often security just hasn't trained them, or they're not aware, and it's everything we've covered so far, it's not part of their nature. The toxic one's something that's not necessarily picked up by many organizations, where people might want to whistleblow or harm the companies to such an extent because of that culture. We're talking about a positive security culture, but a negative culture within the business themselves can, as we've seen, directly lead to security breaches as people deliberately leak data, deliberately get infected with ransomware, or anything else that has happened over the various years. So it shows that to me that sometimes that culture is more than just a security culture. It's understanding the culture of the organization as well, full stop, how they operate, how they work, how they communicate. Similar to many organizations, when there are a mass set of changes in the organization, it's identifying who's impacted. Do we do more monitoring? Do we do some additional checks for these people during that time? But that checking on the culture itself is part of that. How you detect a toxic culture, probably a different conversation, but it's for me, it's very interesting.
Of course, and it's the disgruntled employee who perhaps was the cause of this. So one thing all these have high-profile breaches have in common is they have an amazing IT team and a security team, and they have invested in millions and millions of hardware and software. I work in the vendor side for many years in cybersecurity, so I can say most of the products in the cybersecurity industry are really good and designed by doing loads and loads of research. So, so where do they go wrong here? So you invest in skills, you invest in hardware, but you don't think about training the inside employees or creating a, as we discussed, awareness or a culture where, you know, employees protect the business. They are the, you know, they are the brand, right? So that's perhaps the reason. Maybe, I mean, this is the royal family, right? So maybe it's perhaps the reason that these breaches happen. So,
Well,
sorry, yes, James, you want
yeah,
to say something?
Hashini, I think that's a very good point, because you know, if we anguish to deliver a project over a couple of years for something that's really, really important, and we don't operate it effectively, then all of a sudden we have a risk.
Yes.
If we build a fence around our house with 28 panels and leave one of them missing, is it a fence anymore? No, it's a gate, effectively, because where's the bad guy going to go? Straight through the hole in the fence. So in the security industry, in the security discipline, a couple of things are really important. Number one is completeness. So make sure it's complete, whatever you're delivering, whatever program of work you're delivering, it's complete. And the second one is make sure it's operationally effective. Really important point. How is it working? Go check that all the time.
Yeah.
Are your human beings appropriately trained? Do they understand what the tool is doing? Do they understand when maybe the tool tells them something? Do they understand the alerting in it, etc.? Is it correlated to other tools and other monitoring events and so on? So it's got to be joined up. The only, you know, it's kind of all of your software tools, etc., have got to give a family hug. They've all got to work together to provide the comfort and the reassurance that reduces the risk to your business.
I agree. And also, I mean, cybersecurity is now the biggest crime, right? It's going to be predicted for 10.5 trillion in 2025. So sometimes this is, when I work in the industry for a while, I have seen often companies are very driven to buy the best, you know, so hardware or software, etc. But they don't, and they kind of live in a tunnel vision. So sometimes that's when the external sort of consultancy comes in and look at it from a very different perspective, because often if you're stuck in that only in that industry or in that sort of mindset, it's very difficult to see the threats or the risk from a different perspective. So Andrew, have you sort of come across this when you're during your work line and sort of consultancy side of things?
Yeah, I've certainly seen. It's very easy day to day to focus on things that don't work and miss things that do, overlooking some of the positive stuff. And I think on the next section we have, you know, a few things that companies do but don't necessarily realize. I think, James, going back to your point about all the tools giving each other a hug, I think you said, I've never heard it phrased that way before, but I like it. But, you know, many organizations don't necessarily tie that in at process level either. You know, so like training and awareness, human risk, you know, training and culture, looking at the incidents that individuals cause, you know, what breaches occur, why are they breaching it, and then using that data to then go back and inform their other processes and tools what to look for. This has happened. We need to do this more. And as for me, that's one of the key parts of answering that question of how do we know if we're effective in all of this? You know, it's for me, it's one of the key indicators is the number of incidents is going down. We are not having data breaches, assuming we can measure them in the first place, which is always another question. But Yeah, it's very easy for organizations to look at the negative, that we are getting breaches, and not understanding how that can be enabled to get some of the positives out of it as well.
Okay, thank you. So this leads to our solution. So I think it's quite sort of important to understand, the first step is to understand your risk, right? So if you don't understand the risk gap, you can't, where do you start, right? So if you don't know where your risks are. So it's about between the human and the technology. You need to run certain, so from your experience, James, how do you, because it, again, bank has, I think, more cybersecurity tightness than any other industry. So how would you sort of identify your gaps, and do you use tools, or do you use sort of a bit of both? Like how do you sort of work together?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you've got to be relentless, because the attackers are relentless. So that means you've got to continually assess risk. So there are many things we do. So we do, for example, a comprehensive annual risk assessment on systems, for example, which gives us a good understanding of what we're actually operating. And therefore, if we see a vulnerability or a threat come through for a system, we know exactly where it is, who's responsible for it, and we can get after fixing that vulnerability. Secondly, you've got to have an awareness culture. So, for example, here I run cyber town halls maybe 4 times a year. We invite third parties in as well to kind of run through interesting security and risk subjects to increase awareness. We insert ourselves into the group town halls as well to have a session on risk or a session on security. And as a team, we work very closely together with a very transparent risk culture. The worst thing anyone can do to me is not tell me that there's a problem. Yeah, don't keep it to yourself, is what we say. So we're very, very open. There will be a penalty if you don't tell, but there will be no penalty at all if you tell, because then we can get on with fixing it. And that's an important cultural thing here that we've got in the team. And also the transparency has increased over the years. Since I've been here, we've started, well, we've increased hugely the amount of self-identified issues, things that are issues right now, which has then informed our risk appetite and our risk register. So it's about getting it down, getting on paper, then you could do something about it. All of that culture, if you like, of openness and transparency with your risks and the issues that you're suffering, all of that brings together a really good risk-based culture in the organization, and that will help you fix the problems that you've got.
Thank you. And then the engaging training, Andrew. I mean, this is one of my pet hates, I would say. Boring, constant cyber training I don't know whether anybody would like to listen to another video and then do the sort of compliance tick by doing a quiz, or sort of constantly, this test emails that you receive to check whether how aware you are with your cyber skills. What are your thoughts on that, Andrew? I mean, is there any sort of creative way we could come up with where we could get the employees more engaging and involved?
Understanding your audience, while the fundamental message and behaviors you want to drive might be the same, it doesn't mean you have to teach them all the same way. We've seen many organizations try different things. Comic books, beer and pizza, making movies, interpretive dance was an actual thing we did once. There's many different ways, and some things will work better with others. A panel session and Q&A where people can ask questions and honestly might work far better to one group than a more, I guess, traditional, rigorous video computer-based training situation. So it's understanding the audience for that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So I worked with a gaming company a few years ago, and I was blown away when I saw their training. I think it's because they were very sort of a certain age group, and the cyber training they created for these gaming developers was all based on games. And yeah, they got it. So, and then they did a kind of reverse engineering where they check whenever a new recruit comes through, they would ask them to sort of go in and do normal logins and start creating the software just to see, okay, where are the risks from an individual perspective, and what the individual need. I mean, what areas the individual needs sort of training, etc., which I thought was quite interesting. And then, yeah, I think that leads to tailored training. That's kind of what this software gaming company did, which was very sort of different and interactive. So shall we try some polls? Let me know how many companies have tailor-made training. So you can click on if you have design and tailored training for, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, or if you don't, just don't be shy, click on one. While we are doing it, James, do you want to sort of talk about tailored training that you have come across and which works for the bank, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Andrew said. Make it interesting because people remember it. You know, it becomes, they absorb it into their culture, and they'll tell the stories about this amazing training for years to come, which also helps train other people. And make it real. You know, a lot of cyber, a lot of risk, etc., is a little bit theoretical. It's a little bit nerdy. So make it interesting and real. We here we do a few things, especially in inviting talented guest speakers in and stuff like that, and organizations who like quantum processor. We had a presentation from IBM on that last week, sorry, a few weeks ago, and then went to see it last week. So, you know, stuff like that adds a dimension to your learning that you remember and you talk about for a long time afterwards because you're making it interesting, rather than you've both said, you know, having this slide, multiple choice, you know, tick the box, and don't make sure you get at least 100% right. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, how many people kind of click, click, click just because they're bored to death? So that's
or watch the video on 2 speed and then don't pay attention to it.
Or get your child to watch the video. I'm just joking. But then in terms of success, how do you define success, and where do you sort of, from different organizations would use different measurements. So I work with certain pharma companies. Their success category is so different to the tech companies or the financial sector. So where do you start, and is there sort of like a uniform structure or a basic structure any company could start with? Do you want to go, Andrew, first?
Yeah, I think for me, at its most basic level, it's let's not get hacked, right? Let's not let one of our cyber risks materialize. In its bluntest form is the aim here. Like many things in security, you can get down the rabbit hole of how do we prove success? It's the lack of a negative existing, right? We haven't been breached, we haven't done this, that hasn't happened. The compliance-based approach of let's just train everybody once a year, tick the boxes, get 100%, as James said, you know, that can prove that everyone's sat the training, but hasn't driven that they've embraced it, they've learned it, it's now part of their culture. Yeah. So finding that middle ground is a challenge. It will be slightly different for many organizations, but you know, looking at raw metrics of what breaches are being caused, are they by individuals or by systems or processes? Is there another metric you can use if you for your KPIs and KRIs? You know, that's the middle ground of what we're trying to. How do you measure a cultural change and shift within the organization?
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean to that, Andrew, don't make security invisible.
Yeah,
you know, make it visible. Tell people that you know you've through your automated systems you've fended off this many thousand dodgy emails. this many dodgy website links that you've done. Tell them what you've done, and make it a story, a success story. And what then happens is when you ask them to do something, maybe to make their system more secure, they kind of get it. They get the reason why it's all happening. And also share things like threat intelligence. It's a little bit scary, but people kind of find that quite interesting sometimes as to what's happening out there in the world to other organizations. Hopefully your name isn't on the list, but to other organizations and how they've been breached. And then the kind of stuff, make it real. This is the kind of stuff we've got in place to stop that, or this could happen to us, so we're going to do something about that. So make it real to them all the time. And it's a learning. One of the things we learn, we know we've learned, like, was it training happens at school or something, education is in life or something like that. I can't remember the exact expression, but when it's built in, when it becomes part of you, you're now educated. You're now properly trained.
And as we go back to the other points as well, part of that's making it relevant to the people, both for their job or them, through stories, relating it to their day-to-day lives. I think with the last 9 minutes or so, James, I think what would be interesting for some of our audience is to hear from yourself about what are the elements and activities you got for your own words. So if you'd like to, can you please take us through your work?
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the things I mentioned earlier on is simplicity. So, a pilot would find these images very simple, especially if they're piloting a very large jet airplane. But we would find these a little bit complex, and that's because we're not trained. So how do you start with something that's complex? And many of our businesses are complex. Many of our security environments are complex. How do you start? Well, what you do is you group the controls, the things you have to take care of, and you kind of label them. So if we move to the next slide, here's an example of one that's got labels on. Now, you won't find this in a real aircraft, but oh, nav stuff. Yeah, that's the one with the map. Got that. Fuel control. Yeah, got that. But there's stories there's stories about controls not being clearly marked. Like there was a military plane that kept on crashing as it landed some years ago. And the reason it kept on crashing, eventually they got a psychologist not the engineer, they got a psychologist in. They said, well, who knew nothing about flying airplanes. And what it was the controls next to each other were flaps and wheels. And they're both exactly the same lever, right next to each other. So in the, high stress situation of landing a plane, you've got to make sure the flaps and the wheels go down in the right order, right? Otherwise you will crash the plane. So they changed it very simply by putting a wheel on the wheel one and putting something like a flap on the other one. And then without looking, you could get it right. The lesson in this is when you're asking people to do things to help you be more secure and you're training them, make it simple, make it something that they can learn from, making something they can do with their eyes closed. So the next slide shows a build. Now this looks very, very boring, but hey, it brightens up as we go through it. Key indicators or metrics. So this is your data right at the bottom of your pyramid. Lots and lots of stuff. Make sure you've got them. Make sure they're easy. Make sure you don't have to invent these metrics. So if a piece of machinery, a piece of software punches out some numbers and they can tell you if it's working well or not, that would be your metric. Use what you've got is the first thing. And moving up the pyramid, we come to the next area, which is your controls. So controls are levers, if you like, to do those things, to make them better, to manage them. So the controls might be something like, check every day that your availability is good on your key systems, something like that. And then there will be some more data underneath that, which will be your KRIs or KPIs for that system or those systems. So get your controls organized. And then when you move up from your controls to the next level, you convert them into processes. So a process is a group of controls. So you might have a bunch of controls, say, let's say, for documentation. Your policies must be reviewed every year. Your standards must be reviewed every year. Documents must be produced for all projects, for go live instructions, etc., etc. So there might be, I don't know, 10, 20 controls that cover documentation, for example. So your process would be managing documentation. Okay, so you make it simpler as you go up the pyramid. And then right at the top, you convert all these processes, and there might be 30, 40 of those processes, into risk themes. And in our organization, with 6 risk themes. So the documentation one, for example, all those key metrics into controls, into those processes, the documentation one becomes part of governance as a theme, a risk theme. So when we talk to the board, we only talk about the risk themes. And therefore they say, so how is governance? And we will know our controls. Our controls, by the way, are binary for all you in IT. So they're either working or they're not working. So they're binary. There's no middle ground. So if an audit comes along and says, you've got this bit wrong, you need to go fix it, that's fine. It becomes ineffective, that control. So it's a 0. And then what you do is you calculate up your percentages. So when you get to your risk themes, all of those controls and processes all have a percentage next to them. And eventually you know exactly whether you're managing risk. And you can articulate it in a very simple way to your executive. So this helps manage human risk, because your key risks and indicators are from systems. Your controls help you go from a data point to more information. Your processes, then that information is then used by the department that runs that process or manages that process. And then finally, you have business intelligence right at the top about how risky your technology is. So that kind of helps you reduce human risk. And I flew through that, didn't I?
That's brilliant. Thank you.
But
Yes,
if I can quote somebody, Mr. Einstein, you may have heard of him. He said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we used when we created them." And what all this is really saying is, sometimes we get into a spin. That's the only way we know to do something, that people aren't listening to me, and therefore we can't seem to manage the incidents or the problems that are happening to us or around us. The best thing you can do is look outside, go ask for some help. Okay. And that's really, I think, what we're saying here is, if it's just us doing all the solutions, then we might get a lot of them right, but it's always good to talk.
I agree. Shall I click on the next slide?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Survival. We all need to do this. So do we all know it all? I don't think so. I certainly don't. But we've got teams, and this is building on the previous comments. That will help us really. Talk to our peers, talk to the industry, talk to people who are specialists in that area. You'll be amazed how informed you will be and how supported you'll be in the journey you have to take. You may have heard this before, but I use it a lot. 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth. Use them proportionally. It doesn't work in sales as well, but what it means is these are receptors. Our ear, we listen to things, we hear things, we absorb those. Our eyes, we see things, we visualize things, we imagine things, and we have a vision for the company as well. But when we start to articulate that, make sure we're using all those inputs that we have to give a really good message, and that really helps reduce risk. Know your destination is the 4th bullet. I can give you a destination, walk through that door, and none of us need any further instructions. But I could say, move your chair back, turn to the left, and I could do lots and lots of things in that journey, and I may crash into a wall because I'm following those very detailed instructions. We need that when we're learning something, but we don't need that all the time. We certainly don't need that level for everybody in business. okay, unless it's a particularly technical journey. But we've got to know why we're doing it. And that's the important thing about the destination piece. We know why we're doing it, we get the journey, we understand the journey. And all of the above will give you confidence and help you survive. And survival, of course, reduces risk because you're still there.
Thank you, James.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's great to hear, as you say, talk to other people, as you said, see what other people are doing. And so it's fantastic to hear from you what you and your team are up to. I think we are out of time for questions, sadly. I mean, there was one or two around tools. Can you get one tool to magically solve all this for you? No, but like many things, tools will certainly help you. But we're more than happy to continue this conversation. Harshini and I, when these slides are sent out, I'll have the contact details for Harshini and myself. James, your details will be kept secret as CISO, but I'll sacrifice my own details to be out there. But please keep an eye on the Turnkey website, especially if you're asking us questions about tools and how to do all this. There's many more content and resources there and articles to come. But apart from that, we are at time. So James, thank you very much for your time, your input. It was enlightening. Harshini, thank you for taking us through the content. And to the people watching, thank you for taking the time out of your day. Thank you very much, everyone.
That's all. Bye now.
Thanks, James. Thanks, bye.